This day in sports history. And happy to be part of the Sports History Network, a group of more than 30 podcasts dedicated to preserving the history of sports through the spoken word. For more information, check out sportshistorynetwork.com. It's July 3rd, and on this day in 1954, Babe Didrikson Zaharias conquered the Women's U.S. Open, and in the process, became an inspiration to people battling cancer all over the world. Now, I've talked about Babe Didrikson several times already on this podcast. She was an All-American basketball player for her AAU team in the early 30s, an Olympian in 1932, a barnstorming multi-sport athlete during the Great Depression, and then one of the best women golfers in the world. She was the most recognizable female athlete in the first half of the 20th century. And after she won the U.S. Open on this day in 1954, she was recognized as the greatest female athlete of all time. Now, I get it. We are 70 years removed from this day, and a lot has happened in the world of sports, and women's sports in particular, since then, but she was truly unique. But on this day, the women were playing the final 36 holes of the U.S. Open at Salem Country Club in Peabody, Massachusetts. She started the day with an 8-shot advantage over her nearest competitor, and the way she had been playing, it was like we talked about with Tiger at the U.S. Open in 2000. The only question was really how many she was going to win by. But keep in mind a couple of things. First, Babe had been diagnosed with colon cancer in April 1953 after winning the Babe Zaharias Open. She had been through treatment and surgery, and she was told that she would never play competitive golf again after that. But she defied that prognosis and did return to the women's tour, but not without complications. She was playing this tournament with a colostomy bag. And second, as I've talked about with the U.S. Open at this point, the final day for both the men and women was a 36-hole marathon. Her morning round was a 1/73 and the best score of the early 18. In the afternoon, she shot 75, but everybody else also struggled with the conditions, and her 4 rounds total of 291 was 12 shots better than anybody else in the field. After collecting her 3rd U.S. Open trophy and the 10th major trophy of her career, she addressed the crowd with these remarks.
I don't like to keep bringing up this hospital deal of mine, but I was laying there in room 201 at the Hotel Dieu Hospital, and these reports were going out about that I never play championship or tournament golf again. And I laid in the bed and I says, "Please God, let me play again." And he answered my prayer. And I want to thank God for letting me win again. It's really wonderful.
She became an inspiration to many others who were battling cancer, and she became an advocate for cancer awareness. This was the last major tournament win of her career, though. Sadly, the cancer returned in 1955, and pain in her lower back made it impossible for her to play. She died in September 1956 at the age of 45. On this day in 1966, it was a once-in-a-lifetime performance for a pitcher that, so far, has never been equaled, but with the power that the LA Dodgers' Shohei Ohtani is showing, he'd be the betting favorite to equal what Tony Cloninger did on this day 58 years ago. Cloninger was pitching for the Atlanta Braves against the San Francisco Giants in Candlestick Park. The Braves jumped on the Giants in the first inning, plating 7 runs, 4 of those coming off the bat of Cloninger, who belted the first of his 2 grand slams in this game. The Braves' big inning sent starter Bob Priddy to the showers early. When Cloninger came to the plate in the 4th inning with the bases loaded once again, he took Ray Sadecki's pitch over the right field fence for his second 4-bag, 4 RBI shot of the day. He had a single later in the game that plated another for 9 RBI on the day. It was the ultimate pitcher helping himself kind of game. On the mound, Cloninger pitched a complete game, spraying 7 hits. He struck out 5 and he allowed 3 runs in a 17-3 Braves win. Cloninger's feat of a pitcher hitting 2 grand slams in the same game stands alone. He did hit a pair of solo shots in a game earlier that season, and he finished the season with 5 home runs. On this day in 1968, NFL players went on strike, and though it only lasted a few days, it led to the first collective bargaining agreement. To get to this point actually started years earlier when the players started to organize back in 1956, but they didn't actually form a union until January of '68. At this point, the NFL and AFL had merged, and the players lost the ability to switch leagues to negotiate bigger salaries, and most were unhappy with the compensation. Negotiations for a higher base salary, better pension, and benefits stalled. And so on this day, they decided to strike. The owners retaliated by announcing a lockout. The two sides eventually came back to the table, and after 11 days were able to work out the first CBA in the NFL. Minimum salaries for rookies were set at $9,000, veterans' minimum was $10,000, and league revenue was set aside for player pensions when they retired. While the agreement was signed, a lot of players were still unhappy with the terms. This CBA lasted 2 years, when again on this day in 1970, the players went on strike again with similar demands. That labor stoppage only lasted 4 days. Minimum salaries for rookies and veterans were increased, along with a new independent arbitration board set up to take players' injury grievances out of the commissioner's office. In essence, what happened on this day in '68 gave players a much stronger voice in the room when it came to labor situations in the game. The current CBA for the NFL goes until 2030, so no labor stoppages are on the horizon. And on this day in 2001, the NBA experiment in Vancouver came to an end when the league announced the Grizzlies were officially moving to Memphis. The team had only been in Vancouver for 6 seasons, and fan support had been lacking nearly from the start. As the years went by, the team never got better. They finished last in 5 of 6 seasons north of the border, never won more than a third of their games, and they struggled to draw a marketable player to the franchise to build a team around. Their first draft pick was Bryant Big Country Reeves, but he wasn't a guy who was going to energize your fan base. When Steve Francis was drafted in the '99 draft, he wasn't happy about playing in Vancouver. That thought was solidified in the Vancouver airport after the draft when Francis was traveling with his brother and a friend. A ticketing agent stopped Francis's agent and asked if those guys were a rap group. Francis's demand to be traded resulted in the largest deal at the time that included 11 players and 3 teams that sent Francis to Houston. For a lot of folks, that sealed the fate of the franchise. The Grizzlies, not Stevie franchise. He did fine with the Rockets. And time now for today's non-sports Did You Know? I mentioned a few weeks back that Pennsylvania is misspelled in the Constitution. Well, it's also misspelled on the Liberty Bell. Yep, just the one N in Penn, which, again, kind of odd since the state was named after William Penn with 2 N's. That's all for today. I'll have more tomorrow on This Day in Sports History. This has been an original Thrive Suite production.